Victoria Hale snatched the folder right out of the interpreter's hands and threw it, not dropped it. Threw it flat against the marble floor of the executive corridor pages, exploding across the tile like shrapnel. "Useless!" she snapped. Then she spun around and stopped dead. Naomi Carter was standing near the elevator bank with a supply cart. Uniform, badge, hands on the cart handle. Victoria walked straight up to her, close enough that Naomi could smell her perfume. "Let me be very clear. You are a black girl who mops floors and restocks hand soap. That is your entire value in this building. Whatever you just heard, forget it immediately." Naomi didn't respond. Victoria leaned in closer. "I have a PhD from Georgetown and I still couldn't save this deal. What exactly are you going to do? Scrub the problem away? Go back to your cart." She turned to leave, then stopped. Turned back one more time. "And do yourself a favor, don't let me see your face on this floor again today. People like you make important rooms look small." Naomi stood completely still. Down the corridor, Klaus Richter, briefcase in hand, already at the elevator. $3 billion. 30 seconds from gone. Then Naomi opened her mouth. One sentence. In perfect German. Richter's hand froze on the button. He turned around slowly and looked at her for the first time. "Stay with this story. Drop your city and local time in the comments right now. And if you're not subscribed, yet do it before this is over. You are going to want to see every single second of what comes next." The service entrance to Meridian Aerospace Systems sat on the north side of the building, tucked around the corner from the glass and steel facade that faced the street. There was no logo above this door, no marble flooring on this side, just a concrete ramp, a badge scanner bolted to gray brick, and a strip of fluorescent light that had been humming with the same flat note since the building first opened its doors. Naomi Carter badged in at 6:31 in the morning. She was 34 years old. She had worked in the custodial and facilities department at Meridian Aerospace for 6 years longer than most of the junior executives whose offices she cleaned. She stood 5'6" in her work shoes, which were black, non-slip, and had been resold once at a cobbler on Maple Avenue in East Dallas. Her hair was pinned back under her facilities cap. Her badge read N. Carter Facilities Level 3. Level 3 meant access to the executive floor. Floor 12. The highest clearance granted to anyone in custodial services. Nobody had ever asked what that meant. Nobody ever thought to. She collected her cart from the supply room, checked her assigned floors for the day 10, 11, and 12, and headed upstairs. The elevator she used opened into the service corridor, not the main hallway. That was protocol. The people on floor 12 did not need to see the cart. Meridian Aerospace Systems was not a household name. It did not need to be. Its clients were. Every major commercial carrier operating in the Western Hemisphere flew aircraft containing at least one Meridian-manufactured component composite fuselage panels, pressure housing assemblies, thermal shielding systems for high-altitude operations. The company had been headquartered in North Dallas for 40 years, survived 3 recessions, and 1 near bankruptcy, and spent the last decade quietly repositioning itself as a Tier 1 global aerospace supplier. Today was the culmination of that effort. Today Klaus Richter was coming. Richter Luftfahrt Group was Germany's second-largest private aerospace manufacturer. Klaus Richter had built it from a mid-sized family engineering firm into an international conglomerate over 30 years. He was 63 years old. He was worth approximately $4 billion. He controlled manufacturing facilities in Hamburg, Stuttgart, and Toulouse, and he had come to Dallas to finalize a $3 billion joint manufacturing partnership that would make Meridian Aerospace his primary North American production partner for the next decade. 19 months of negotiation. One afternoon, to close it. At 7 in the morning, the facilities team gathered in the second-floor briefing room. Victoria Hale stood at the front in a cream blazer, a leather folio in one hand, the other resting on the edge of the table with the specific practiced stillness of someone who had spent years learning exactly how to occupy a room in a way that made everyone else feel peripheral. She did not look up when the facilities team filed in. "Today is a significant day for this company," she said when the room was quiet. The Richter delegation arrives at 11. The formal meeting is at 2. Every non-essential interaction between facilities personnel and delegation members is prohibited. You clean. You restock. You remain invisible. That is what today requires from you. She let the silence hold. Then her eyes moved briefly, deliberately to Naomi. They didn't linger. They didn't need to. "The technical communications coordinator vacancy has been filled internally," she added. "No further updates on that posting." She closed the folio. "Questions?" No one spoke. Naomi had applied for that position 3 months earlier. She had spent 2 evenings writing the cover letter, measuring each sentence, choosing each word carefully. She had submitted the application on a Thursday night through the company portal. The automated rejection arrived the following Monday morning, after review. "We have determined that this role requires formal qualifications and demonstrated professional communication credentials. We wish you well in your search." No interview, no phone call, no name signed at the bottom. Just a clean, efficient form that told her exactly what the company thought she was worth. She had printed it, folded it, placed it on page 22 of her notebook. The notebook looked like nothing from the outside, a small black hardcover journal worn at the corners, spine cracked and reinforced with electrical tape, the kind you'd pass over without a second glance. But open it, and the story changed entirely. What lived inside those pages had no business belonging to a custodial worker at an aerospace company, a hand-built German-English technical aviation glossary 3 years in the making. Composite materials, avionics systems, structural engineering, intellectual property licensing law in both languages, margins packed with corrections layered over corrections, sentences written and rewritten until every word carried its exact weight. She had built it because of her father. Staff Sergeant James Carter had been stationed at Ramstein Air Base, Germany from 1994 to 2002. Naomi had lived there from age 7 to 14 full years in a country where German was the language of the schoolyard. The corner store, the neighbor across the landing, the entire texture of daily life. She had absorbed it the way children absorb language, completely effortlessly, permanently. When the family returned to Dallas, the language came with her. Her father died at 52 from a service-related illness. He left behind a dress uniform in a garment bag, a modest amount in savings, and a dog tag on a thin silver chain. Naomi had worn that chain around her neck every day since the morning of his funeral. She wore it now underneath her uniform as she stepped off the service elevator onto floor 12 and reached for her supplies. 11 floors below, a black SUV rolled through the security gate on the north side of the campus. The Richter delegation had arrived. And before any of them had stepped through the front entrance, Erich Brandt Richter's chief of staff, a sharp, watchful man of 31, was already in the back seat with his phone pressed to his ear. Jaw tight, voice low and clipped. Something had already started to go wrong. 10:15 in the morning. The executive corridor on floor 12 had the particular quiet of expensive architecture, thick carpeting, absorbing footsteps, soundproofed walls, swallowing conversation, the whole space engineered to feel calm, even when it wasn't. Naomi pushed her cart along the service side of the hallway with the unhurried, efficient rhythm of someone who has cleaned the same floor long enough to know every door, every hinge, every light fixture that flickers half a second before it steadies. Conference Room B was the third door on the left. It had glass walls on two sides, floor-to-ceiling panels facing the main corridor and the adjacent executive lounge. The lower portion was frosted for privacy. The upper portion was clear. If you were standing in the hallway at the right angle with a cleaning cloth in your hand, you could see everything from the shoulders up. You could watch the whole room without anyone inside knowing you were there. Naomi could see everything. Inside a long oval table, a projection screen at the far end, water glasses lined up with the precision of someone who had arranged them twice. On one side sat 3 members of Meridian's engineering team. 2 men and a woman company lanyards, laptops, open printed documents stacked in front of them. Opposite them, 4 members of the Richter Luftfahrt delegation in dark tailored suits. Between the 2 groups, standing slightly off-center with a notepad in hand, was Marcus Webb. Marcus was 38. His credential came from a language services firm in Austin. His business card read, Senior Corporate Interpreter. He had done similar work for 3 other companies in the Dallas-Fort Worth area: hospitality clients, general business meetings, executive dinners. His German was fluent in the way that mattered for those contexts: smooth, confident, comfortable with pleasantries and standard business vocabulary. This was not that context. Klaus Richter was not yet in the room. This was the preliminary technical walkthrough. An hour before the main delegation arrived, Richter's engineering and legal team would meet with Meridian's technical staff to align on the contract's critical provisions. The lead speaker on the German side was a compact, precise man, Dr. Holger Bauer, Richter Luftfahrt's head of intellectual property and licensing, 22 years in aerospace contract law. When Dr. Bauer spoke, he did not make conversation. He made a record. He was speaking now. Fast, formal, clipped each sentence, structured like a legal brief. He was raising a specific concern about a specific clause. Article 7, Paragraph 3 of the Partnership Agreement. Gemeinsame Mitentwicklungsrechte, joint co-development rights. Any derivative technologies developed during the partnership would be co-patented. Equal ownership, equal standing. Neither party could claim exclusivity. This was what the contract said in German. This was what it said in English. Dr. Bauer wanted verbal confirmation that Meridian's team understood this foundational point before the afternoon signing. He finished. Waited. Marcus Webb nodded, made a note on his pad, and turned to the Meridian side. Dr. Bauer is asking whether there's some flexibility in the general timeline for collaborative milestone reviews. Naomi's hand stopped moving on the glass. She had been wiping the exterior panel in a slow, even stroke, the kind of motion that becomes automatic after 1,000 repetitions. Her eyes had drifted to the room, almost out of habit. She was not eavesdropping. She was simply in the hallway doing her job, and the voices were audible through the panel. She had watched Dr. Bauer's mouth. She had heard enough of his voice through the glass to catch the register, the legal German, the precise compound nouns, the specific vocabulary of intellectual property law. She knew exactly what he had said. What Marcus Webb just told the Meridian team was a different sentence entirely. Gemeinsame Mitentwicklungsrechte für alle abgeleiteten Technologien. She mouthed it under her breath, completely silently. Joint co-development rights on all derivative technologies. Co-patent ownership. No exclusivity on either side. The Meridian engineer across the table nodded at Marcus's translation and began talking about quarterly review scheduling. Naomi stood completely still for 3 full seconds. She had a choice. She knew what she had heard. She knew what had just been said instead. And she understood with the specific, sharp clarity of someone who had spent 3 years building a technical German vocabulary notebook entry by entry that what Marcus had just communicated to the Meridian team bore no meaningful relationship to Dr. Bauer's actual concern. The two sides were now effectively operating in two different negotiations. One party had just raised a foundational question about intellectual property rights. The other party had just started discussing calendar logistics. She looked down at her reflection in the glass panel. Uniform, badge, supply cart. She thought about the rejection letter. Page 22. She picked up her cloth, started wiping again. Let the door stay closed. But as she turned the cart toward the next room, she glanced back through the glass for just a moment. Eric Brandt was seated at the far end of the German side of the table. He had not been speaking. He had been watching the room the way certain people in meetings watch everything except the person talking. And in the exact moment that Naomi turned to leave, his eyes moved from the table to the glass panel, directly to her. Their eyes met. 2 seconds, maybe 3. Neither of them moved. Neither. Then Naomi turned away. Her cart squeaked softly as she headed down the corridor. She did not look back. Behind her, through the glass, she could no longer see both sides of the table were wrapping up. Handshakes crossing the oval surface. Smiles. Nods. The preliminary walk-through ending on what appeared to everyone in that room to be a note of shared understanding. They had no idea they had just agreed to two completely different things. 11:45 in the morning. The facility's break room on the second floor had 2 vending machines, a folding table with 4 plastic chairs, a microwave that consistently smelled like someone else's lunch, and a wall clock that ran 11 minutes fast. Nobody had ever fixed the clock. It had become, over time, a kind of institutional fact, like the flickering light in the stairwell or the elevator that always paused a half-second too long before its doors opened. A room that knew exactly what it was, a place to disappear from the building for 30 minutes and then go back into it. Naomi sat alone at the folding table. Her thermos was in front of her rice black beans, a small container of hot sauce tucked beside it. She hadn't opened any of it. Her earbuds were in. Her phone screen, cracked diagonally from the upper left corner, was propped against the thermos. She was not listening to music. The podcast playing through her earbuds was Deutsche Luft- und Raumfahrt. Aktuell, a German aerospace industry broadcast, produced out of Hamburg. It covered regulatory updates, manufacturing developments, and the kind of dense aerospace contract law that had almost no audience outside of the industry. The host spoke the way a professor speaks to a graduate seminar, assuming fluency, assuming prior knowledge, moving fast. Naomi mouthed along with every sentence. Occasionally she paused. The episode picked up her pen and wrote in the notebook open beside her therma. If Darnell Washington hadn't sat down across from her at that exact moment, the notebook would have stayed closed. Darnell was 26, worked the same floor rotation, possessed an excellent sense of humor, and a minimal tolerance for anything that required sustained concentration. He dropped into the chair with a bag of chips, looked at the table, and stopped chewing. He was staring at the open notebook. Dense German text, English annotations in the margins, structural diagrams labeled in both languages. What is all that? Naomi didn't look up from the page she was writing on. German. Darnell looked at the notebook, looked at her, back at the notebook. Why? She recapped her pen. Because I can. He considered this for a long moment, found nowhere useful to take. It opened his chips and returned to his phone. Naomi put her earbuds back in. The notebook was 3 years old. From the outside, it showed its age. Black hardcover, worn soft at the corners, spine cracked and repaired with electrical tape rubber band replaced twice. The kind of thing you'd pass over without a second look. But open it, and you found something that had no business existing in the pocket of a custodial worker at an aerospace company. 4 languages across every spread, German primary, English secondary, French in the middle section, Portuguese beginning to fill the back. The German-English pages were the most developed, a complete technical aviation glossary built by hand entry by entry over 36 months. Verbundwerkstoff composite material. Druckgehäuse pressure housing assembly. Mitentwicklungsrecht. Co-development right. Exklusivlizenz. Exclusive license. Each entry cross-referenced. Each term placed in legal and engineering context with example sentences, usage notes, common mistranslations flagged in red ink. Nobody at Meridian Aerospace knew this notebook existed. Nobody had ever asked Naomi Carter what she did between the end of one shift and the beginning of the next. At 12:20, she clocked back in and was assigned to Suite C, the executive hospitality suite on floor 12, reserved for the Richter delegation's private use between sessions. Fresh water bottles. Coffee station restocked. Towels replaced. The standard service? She let herself in with her key card. The room was empty. Afternoon light came through the floor-to-ceiling windows at a flat angle, catching the grain of the mahogany side table. A plate of untouched pastries sat near the window. The coffee machine was cold. On the conference table, 2 stacks of printed documents side by side. On the left, the English version of the Meridian Richter partnership agreement. On the right, the German translation printed by the legal team for the delegation's reference during the afternoon meeting. Naomi set down her supply basket. She picked up the German copy. She found Article 7, Paragraph 3 in under 30 seconds. Gemeinsame Mitentwicklungsrechte für alle abgeleiteten Technologien werden zu gleichen Teilen von beiden Parteien gehalten. Joint co-development rights for all derivative technologies shall be held in equal parts by both parties. No exclusivity. No dominant ownership. Equal standing. She read it twice. Set it down. Picked up the English version. Found the same clause. Read it. Set it down beside the German. Both contracts were correct. Both documents said the same thing. The problem was not in any of these pages. The problem was in what had been said aloud in Conference Room B an hour and a half ago, in the gap between what Dr. Bauer had asked and what Marcus Webb had passed across the table in its place. She stood at the table for a moment. The afternoon sun moved behind a cloud. The room dimmed slightly. She picked up her supply basket, walked toward the door. Then she stopped. On the credenza beside the window, a legal pad, face up, covered in handwriting. One of the German engineers had left it behind. Technical notes for the afternoon presentation, materials specifications, structural dimensions, reference measurements. All in German. Precise abbreviated the shorthand of an expert writing for themselves. She picked it up. Read it in under a minute. Turned it over. On the blank side of the back page, she wrote a clean English summary organized by section technically exact, every term correctly rendered. She placed it back on the credenza blank side up. Then she picked up her basket, walked to the door, and left. She was 2 floors down, restocking a supply closet on floor 10, when her phone buzzed. A message from the facilities coordinator, Suite C. One of the German delegates returned for his notes. He's asking who translated the back page. Do you know anything about that? Naomi read it once. Slipped the phone back into her pocket. She didn't reply. But something shifted inside her chest quietly, without announcement, the way a door that has been stuck for a very long time moves just barely on its hinge. Not open. Not yet. Just moved. 12:40 in the afternoon. The atrium lobby on the ground floor of Meridian Aerospace was the kind of space architects designed to communicate a specific message. 40-foot ceilings, exposed steel beams painted matte black, a living wall of greenery running the full length of the east side. It told you quietly, and without apology, that the people inside it built things that mattered. Naomi was restocking the hospitality station near the main elevator bank. A low credenza set into a niche in the west wall stocked with bottled water single-serve coffee pods, charging cables in a small wicker basket, and a folded city guide that nobody ever read. She had been there 7 minutes. In 7 minutes, she had restocked 3 shelves, wiped down the surface, replaced a dead outlet strip, and was reaching for the last row of water bottles when the elevator doors opened. Eric Brandt stepped out fast. He was already on his phone before his second foot hit the marble. Mid-30s, lean, dark suit, the kind of focused energy that filled a room, not through volume, but through precision. He moved to a clear space near the window wall and spoke in rapid, low German, the German of someone choosing their words carefully because they were very close to running out of patience. Naomi's hands slowed on the water bottles. She kept her back to him. She kept moving. He was talking to someone on the Richter team. His voice was measured, but the tension underneath was unmistakable. The tightness of a person who has watched something go wrong all day and has now moved past concern into something harder and colder. He said Marcus was the problem. His German was not technical. Every time Dr. Bauer raised the IP clause, Marcus translated around it instead of through it. Richter had been in this building for 3 hours, and the co-development question had still not been addressed directly. Not once. Richter was now operating under the assumption that Meridian was deliberately deflecting, that the softened translations were not incompetence, but strategy. If that impression was not corrected before 2 p.m., Richter would not sign anything. He would stand up, thank the room for their time, and be in an SUV back to DFW within the hour. He said, hat bereits entschieden. Wir brauchen jemanden, der wirklich versteht, was sagt. He has already made up his mind. We need someone who actually understands what he is saying. Naomi set a water bottle down. Quietly. Her face stayed neutral. A second member of the delegation stepped off the elevator behind Eric, a younger man, mid-20s laptop bag over one shoulder. He looked around the atrium, spotted Naomi at the hospitality station, and walked over. His expression was simple, his German easy and direct. He wasn't frustrated. He just needed something. Entschuldigung, ich suche ein Ladekabel. Mein Handy ist fast leer. Haben Sie vielleicht eins? Excuse me, I'm looking for a charging cable. My phone is almost dead. Do you happen to have one? Naomi reached into the wicker basket without pausing, held up 2 cables, answered him in German calm, natural, the accent grounded and correct the register of someone who learned the language before they ever thought about the act of learning. Natürlich. Welchen Anschluss brauchen Sie? Wir haben USB-C und Lightning. Of course. Which connector do you need? We have USB-C and Lightning. The younger delegate reached for the cable, then stopped. He looked at her, at her facilities badge, at the hospitality cart, at his colleague across the room. 12 feet away, Eric Brandt had lowered his phone from his ear. He was staring at Naomi, completely still. Neither man spoke. Eric took one slow step forward. When his voice came, it was quiet, not calm, but controlled. Sie sprechen Deutsch. Not a question. The statement of someone who has just felt the floor shift slightly beneath their feet and is making sure they are still standing on it. Naomi looked at him directly. Ja. One word. She placed the cable in the younger man's hand, picked up her supply basket, and walked toward the service corridor. Steady pace. Even stride. Her pulse was doing something entirely different, but nothing in her face or her step acknowledged it. She moved without hurrying, without looking back. Eric Brandt stood in the middle of the atrium for 5 full seconds after she disappeared around the corner. Then he took out his phone. Different number, different call entirely, and put it to his ear. When the line connected, his voice had changed. The tightness was still there, but something new had entered it. Something that sounded faintly and carefully like the first small piece of relief in a very long day. He was calling Klaus Richter's suite directly. At the far end of the atrium, near the reception desk, Victoria Hale had been reviewing the afternoon security arrangements with her assistant clipboard radio, a printed copy of the 2 p.m. access list. She had been doing this for 4 minutes without once looking up. Until now. She looked up because she registered at the edge of her attention a specific kind of stillness, the kind that happens when something unexpected occurs in a room full of people who are moving. She followed the stillness to its source and found Eric Brandt standing near the elevator bank, phone pressed to his ear, eyes fixed on the corridor where Naomi Carter had just disappeared. Victoria's clipboard dropped an inch in her hand. She set it on the desk, said something brief to her assistant, and then crossed the atrium in 6 deliberate steps, her heels finding the marble with a clean, sharp rhythm that was not the sound of someone walking toward a conversation. It was the sound of someone walking toward a correction. Victoria Hale reached the service corridor entrance just as Naomi was turning the corner. She didn't call out from a distance. She closed the gap fast, stepped directly into Naomi's path, and stopped her before she reached the supply closet door. They were in the transition space between the main atrium and the service hallway, not quite the lobby, not quite the back. 3 of Naomi's colleagues at the hospitality station had a clear sight line to where they stood. 2 members of the Richter delegation, still near the elevator bank, were 30 feet away. Victoria had chosen this spot deliberately. "What exactly?" she said, in a voice pitched to carry just far enough. "Were you doing just now?" Naomi stood with her supply basket in both hands. "He asked me for a charging cable. I handed him one. And the German..." He spoke to me in German. I answered. Victoria looked at her for a long, flat moment, the look of someone observing something that has exceeded its designated function and needs to be corrected back into its proper place. Then she took 1 step closer. "Let me make something very clear to you." Her voice dropped. Not from discretion, from precision. Quieter, but sharper. The kind of tone designed to reach the person directly in front of you and nowhere else, so that what was said could never technically be called a scene. You are a black woman who pushes a supply cart and restocks hand soap on the 12th floor. That is what you do. That is the complete and total extent of your function in this building. And whatever you thought you were doing near that elevator bank, whatever role you imagined yourself filling for 30 seconds, was not your role. It will never be your role. Nobody at the hospitality station moved. Naomi said nothing. Victoria tilted her head slightly the way people do when they have decided to disguise something cruel as something reasonable. "I want you to understand something. I have a PhD from Georgetown University. I have managed delegation visits from 20 different countries. I have spent 14 years building a reputation in this industry. And I could not fix what is happening in that room today." A pause, clean and deliberate. "So let me ask you a genuine question. What exactly do you think you are going to do? Do you believe that a black girl carrying a basket of cleaning supplies is going to walk into a $3 billion aviation deal and accomplish what I cannot? Does that seem realistic to you?" She stepped closer still. Close enough that her voice dropped to almost nothing, the specific register of a person who wants their words to land without witnesses. "If I see you near a single member of that delegation again today, for any reason in any part of this building, I will have your facilities contract terminated before you reach the parking garage. And I will personally call every facilities management firm in the DFW area and give them your name. Are we absolutely clear?" Naomi's knuckles had gone white around the basket handle. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "Yes, ma'am." Victoria straightened her blazer, turned, walked away heels precise against marble posture, unmoved the walk of a person who considers the matter closed. Nobody in the corridor spoke. The three colleagues at the hospitality station continued studying the credenza surface. An engineer passing with a folder glanced up, registered exactly what had just occurred, and looked back down at his feet without breaking stride. Not one person moved toward Naomi. Not one person met her eyes. 30 feet away, near the elevator bank, Eric Brandt had seen all of it. He hadn't heard the words too far, voices too low, but he had watched the shape of it, the deliberate positioning, Victoria stepping forward, Naomi standing with the basket in both hands, and her eyes lowered, absorbing it with the particular stillness of someone who has absorbed it many times before and knows exactly how long it takes to pass. He watched Victoria walk away. He watched Naomi stand alone in the corridor for 3 seconds. His jaw tightened. He said nothing. He turned and stepped into the elevator. The service elevator on the north side was slow. Naomi pressed the button and stood with her back to the corridor while she waited. The doors opened. She stepped inside. The doors closed. She set the basket on the floor, pressed her back against the metal wall. Her hands were shaking, not dramatically, not in any way visible from the outside, but she could feel it in her fingers in the faint red line the basket handle had pressed into her palm. She breathed. Once. Deliberately. She took out the notebook, opened it to page 22. The rejection letter was still folded in its neat rectangle, the crease lines soft from repeated handling. This role requires formal qualifications and demonstrated professional communication credentials. She read it. She had read it enough times that she didn't need to. Those words had long since migrated from the page into something more permanent. But she read it again anyway. Then she turned to the next blank page, picked up her pen, and wrote 4 words. She's probably right anyway. She stared at them, closed the notebook, pressed it against her chest, closed her eyes. Her thumb found the dog tag through her uniform. Cold metal, thin chain. 3 floors above her in his corner office, Daniel Prescott was staring at a flagged email his chief legal officer had just placed on his desk, a formal written objection from the Richter Luftfahrt legal team sent 47 minutes ago. In German, about the IP clause interpretation. It had been filtered into the spam folder. It had never reached him. Daniel picked up his phone, called his assistant. "Find Marcus Webb, right now." Marcus Webb's phone rang 4 times and went to voicemail. Daniel set the phone down, looked at the email, looked at the clock on his wall. 1 hour and 14 minutes to the meeting, 1:05 in the afternoon. The facility's break room on the 2nd floor was empty except for Naomi. She had been sitting at the folding table for 11 minutes. Her thermos was sealed. Her earbuds were out. Her notebook sat closed in front of her rubber band, still on her hand, resting flat on top of it, the way you rest your hand on something you are not ready to open again. She was not doing anything. She was just sitting. Frank Dobbins appeared in the doorway at 1:06. He was 58 years old, with gray at the temples, and the kind of face that had spent 26 years absorbing the specific wear of a building that never fully rested. He had worked at Meridian Aerospace longer than the current CEO had been, with the company longer than most of the executive team had known the building existed. He knew every hallway, every shortcut, every access log, every name attached to every badge in this facility. And he had spent the last 20 minutes looking for Naomi Carter. He came into the room and sat down across from her. He didn't ask why she looked the way she looked. He had seen enough people in enough break rooms to understand that some questions are answered better by waiting. So he waited. The vending machine hummed. The clock on the wall, running 11 minutes fast, showed a time that meant nothing. Then Frank folded his hands on the table and spoke. "The German engineer in Suite C. He came to find me about 40 minutes ago." His voice was even, not the evenness of someone without feeling, but the evenness of someone who had learned long ago where to put it. He said someone on our facilities team had translated his technical notes, said they were perfectly rendered. Precise terminology, correct structure, everything in order. He asked for the person's name. Naomi looked at him. I gave him yours. Frank paused. He said she understood exactly what we are trying to build. He let that sit for a moment. He said it twice. The room stayed quiet. Neither of them moved. Frank's eyes dropped to the notebook on the table, the closed cover, the worn corners, the rubber band stretched thin from too many years of use. How long have you spoken German? Spoken. Naomi looked at the notebook, then at Frank. Then she told him. She told him about Ramstein, about 7 years in Germany, the schoolyard, and the corner store, and the neighbor across the landing, about absorbing a language at an age when you don't learn it so much as become it. She told him about the podcasts, the aerospace broadcasts from Hamburg, the 3 years building the notebook entry by entry in break rooms and on lunch breaks, and in her car in the parking lot on Tuesday evenings. And then she told him about this morning. She told him about Conference Room B, about watching Dr. Bauer through the glass panel and hearing the legal compound noun gemeinsame Mitentwicklungsrechte and understanding exactly what it meant and exactly what Marcus Webb had said in its place. She told him about Suite C, about reading both contracts side by side and confirming what she already suspected. The documents were correct on both sides. The verbal interpretation was catastrophically wrong. She told him what that meant, that Richter Luftfahrt was sitting in this building, convinced Meridian intended to strip them of co-patent rights on every technology the partnership produced. That both sides were walking into a 2 p.m. meeting, believing they had agreed to the same deal. They had not. Frank listened to every word without interruption. When she finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the table. Then he looked at her. You need to go to Daniel Prescott. Ms. Hale just threatened to terminate my contract if I heard what Victoria said. His voice was still even, but there was something underneath it now, quiet, settled, and firm, in the way that certain things are firm, not because they are inflexible, but because they have real weight. Victoria Hale has been standing in front of doors in this company for 11 years. She didn't build anything here. She decided who got through and who didn't, and she called that leadership. He looked directly at Naomi. I have watched you for 3 years. You are the sharpest person on this floor. Not the sharpest person in facilities. In the building. And it is long past time that somebody said that where it could actually matter. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and placed a folded piece of paper on the table between them. It was a printed email. The engineer from Suite C had sent it to Frank 42 minutes ago, a brief formal message of professional appreciation with the building access log attached. The log showed Naomi's employee ID as the last facilities staff member to enter the suite. Her name was in a document that had originated from the German side of this negotiation, before anyone on the American side had given her a second thought. Your name is already in writing, Frank said. From their side, Victoria can threaten your contract all she wants, but a $3 billion partnership collapsing because the one person who could fix it chose silence that story has a different ending. And her name, not yours, is the one attached to the collapse. Naomi looked at the email, then at the notebook. She pulled it across the table, removed the rubber band, and opened it to page 22, the rejection letter still folded along its original crease. This role requires formal qualifications and demonstrated professional communication credentials. She turned to the next page. The 4 words in fresh ink. She's probably right anyway. She held her pen over them for a moment, not hesitating exactly, just finishing something she needed to finish before she could move forward. Then she drew a slow, straight line through all 4 words. Deliberate, unhurried, The line of someone who has made a decision and is marking the exact moment it became final. She closed the notebook, stood up. "Where is Mr. Prescott's office?" Frank let out a long, slow breath, the kind that had been held for a while. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something quieter and more earned than that. Something that looked like relief finding its way out after a long wait. 12th floor, corner suite. Turn left off the elevator. He pushed back his chair and stood. "I'm walking you there." They had 43 minutes, 17 in the afternoon. The executive corridor on floor 12 was empty when Frank Dobbins and Naomi Carter stepped off the elevator. The carpet was thicker up here, the lighting warmer. The whole atmosphere calibrated toward a specific kind of confidence that Naomi had cleaned around 6 days a week for 3 years without ever being invited into. Daniel Prescott's corner suite sat at the end of the hall. The nameplate beside the door read Daniel Prescott, President and CEO. His assistant, Janet Morales, was at the outer desk when they arrived mid-50s, reading glasses pushed to her forehead, a printed schedule open in front of her. She was on her feet before they reached the desk. "He is in pre-meeting preparation. There are no unscheduled visits this afternoon." Frank stepped forward. "She has critical information about the Richter deal. I have been at this company 26 years. I am personally vouching for her." Janet looked at Naomi, took in the facilities badge, the uniform, the supply basket still clipped to her cart. Then she looked back at Frank, at his face, at the 26 years he had just placed quietly on the table in front of her. She stepped aside. Frank stayed at the threshold. He looked at Naomi once, a single, quiet nod that contained everything that needed to be said. Then she walked through the door alone. Daniel Prescott was standing at his desk when she entered, one hand on a printed document, the other holding a pen that had stopped moving. He looked up. He did not call for security. He did not ask why a facilities employee was in his office on the most consequential afternoon of his professional year. He set the pen down and waited. Naomi spoke immediately. Fast, structured, precise the way she had organized it in her head during the elevator ride. No wasted words, no apology for being in the room. She laid out the IP co-development clause, both the German written version and the English written version, both correct, both aligned. She explained Marcus Webb's vocabulary gap in legal technical German, the specific compound noun gemeinsame Mietentwicklungsrechte that had never appeared in a hospitality or general business context and had been smoothed into something unrecognizable. She described what Dr. Bauer had actually raised in the morning walkthrough and what Marcus had placed in its position. She told him what that meant. Klaus Richter had spent 3 hours in this building believing Meridian intended to claim exclusive ownership of all derivative technologies the partnership would produce. He was not being unreasonable. He was not being obstructive. He was responding logically to what he had been told. Daniel had not moved. He turned his laptop and pointed to a paragraph in the German contract document open on his screen. Article 7, paragraph 3. Tell me exactly what that says. Naomi translated it live. No pause. No reaching for vocabulary. Clean and exact, every legal qualifier in place, every technical term rendered correctly into English, the meaning preserved completely. Daniel stared at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone and made a single call. Short, flat, and final. When he set it down, Marcus Webb's interpreter credential for the afternoon had been revoked. He stood up, walked around his desk, stopped directly in front of her. "I need to ask you one thing before we walk through that door." His voice was level, not unkind, but completely without softness. The voice of someone who understands that the next 60 seconds matters. "If I bring you into that conference room in front of my board, in front of 6 German aerospace executives, in front of a man whose company controls more aviation manufacturing capacity than anyone in continental Europe, and it falls apart. One translation wrong. One technical term misplaced. The deal collapses. A $3 billion failure with your name on it. Are you prepared to carry that? The office was completely quiet. The HVAC hummed low through the vents. Somewhere down the corridor, an elevator chimed once and fell silent. Naomi did not look at the floor, did not swallow, did not take a breath first. Yes. Daniel held her gaze for 3 full seconds. Then, good. If you'd hesitated, I wouldn't have trusted you to do it. He glanced toward the doorway where Frank was standing. One nod. Frank returned it. 26 years of quiet competence passed between 2 people in a single gesture. They walked to the boardroom, side by side, Daniel Prescott and Naomi Carter moving down the executive corridor toward the double doors at the far end. 2 soundtracks filled the hallway. Daniel's polished wingtip shoes struck each step with a clean, authoritative click, the sound of a man who had walked this floor 1,000 times and belonged on every one of them. Naomi's work shoes, resoled once on Maple Avenue, fell quieter and steadier. A different sound entirely. Same direction. Same marble. 2 completely different stories about what it cost to be here. Daniel spoke without turning his head. My grandfather worked on the assembly line at Boeing in Everett, Washington for 32 years. Never had his name on a single component he built, but every plane he touched is still flying somewhere. A pause. He would have understood you. Naomi's hand moved to the thin chain at her collarbone. Her father's dog tag. Staff Sergeant James Carter, Ramstein Air Base, Germany. My father said the people who know the most in any room are usually the ones nobody thinks to ask. Neither of them spoke again. At the end of the corridor, the double doors of Conference Room A appeared. Through the frosted glass, silhouettes moving. Low voices. And one figure standing at the far end, briefcase already in hand, the posture of a man whose mind was made up. Daniel checked his watch. They had less than 3 minutes. The hallway outside the boardroom was where it had all started. Victoria Hale was pressed against the far wall with her phone flat against her ear, working through the last names on her contact list: corporate interpreter, agencies, private language service firms, 2 freelance contractors she had used before. Every call went the same way, unavailable on 40-minute notice, booked through the afternoon, try again tomorrow. She was on her final number when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned. Daniel Prescott was walking down the corridor. And walking directly beside him, in a facilities uniform supply basket still clipped to her cart, the same woman Victoria had sent back to her floor 43 minutes ago, was Naomi Carter. Victoria went completely white. She stepped forward fast. Daniel. Her voice came out wrong, too high, too compressed, the voice of a person whose authority has just slipped from under them and who is trying to find the edges of it. What is this? She is a custodial employee. I gave a direct order. She has no clearance to be anywhere near this meeting. I specifically... Victoria. Daniel's voice was flat and unhurried. The specific quiet of someone who has already decided and is simply informing the room of that decision. Step aside or leave the building. Choose now. The corridor went completely silent. Nobody moved. The 2 board members standing near the door studied the floor. A junior member of the Richter delegation near the water station watched with the careful stillness of someone choosing not to be seen watching. Not one person came to Victoria's defense. Not one voice. She looked at Daniel, at Naomi, at the faces that offered nothing back. She stepped aside. Her hands found the wall behind her. Daniel pushed open the boardroom doors. Naomi followed him inside. Conference room. A was everything the building's architects had intended: floor-to-ceiling windows on two sides, with a direct view of the Dallas skyline, in afternoon light. A mahogany table long enough to seat 16 crystal water glasses at every position. Not one of them had been touched. On one side, Meridian's executive team, senior engineers, the chief legal officer, Howard Vance, from the ownership group positioned alone in the far corner, watching everything without appearing to watch anything. On the other side, the 6 members of the Richter Luftfahrt delegation in dark, tailored suits. And at the far end of the table, Klaus Richter. He was already standing. He had already told Eric before anyone arrived that he would give this room 15 minutes. If the IP clause was not addressed directly and clearly in the first 15 minutes, he was done. He was not angry anymore. He was simply finished. He began to speak before Daniel had crossed the room. Fast, formal, each sentence delivered like a closed document. Nothing left open, nothing soft, nothing asking to be negotiated. He listed what had happened, the unanswered written objection sent 47 minutes ago. The co-development clause, raised 3 separate times in conversations throughout the day, deflected every time. The accumulating sense that Meridian's team was not hearing him, or had chosen not to. He said it was not a language barrier that concerned him. It was what the language barrier revealed about the people behind it. He finished. Let the silence settle. Then 5 words without drama and without doubt. Wir werden nicht unterschreiben. We will not sign. His hand moved to the briefcase clasp. Daniel looked at Naomi. She stepped forward. No request for permission. No pause to be introduced. No glance at Victoria standing motionless in the doorway. She looked directly at Klaus Richter, not at the room, not at the table at him, and began to speak in German. Fluent, precise, pitched to exactly the formal register of a professional negotiation at this level. She repeated his concerns back to him. Everyone. Word for word. Not softened, not reorganized, not translated into something more palatable. Exactly what he had said, with exactly the weight he had placed on each point. Richter's hand stopped on the briefcase clasp. She explained the clause. English version: joint co-development rights, co-patent ownership on all derivative technologies, equal standing between both parties, precisely what both written contracts stated. What Marcus Webb had communicated across 3 separate conversations: exclusive American control over all derivative IP German rights subordinated. No shared ownership on anything built from the partnership forward. 2 correct written contracts. 1 catastrophically wrong verbal interpretation. Neither side deceiving the other. Both sides responding with perfect logic to what they had each been told. Then the sentence. Sie wurden nicht belogen. Sie wurden falsch übersetzt. Das sind 2 sehr verschiedene Dinge. You were not being deceived. You were being mistranslated. Those are 2 very different things. The room stopped breathing. Richter's hand released the clasp. He looked at her, not at the uniform, not at the badge, not at the supply basket at the edge of the room. At her eyes. At the steadiness there. The absolute unperformed certainty of someone who knew exactly what they were saying and why every word of it was true. He sat back down. The room exhaled, not together, but one person at a time, like pressure releasing slowly from a sealed space. Howard Vance opened his notebook and began writing for the first time all afternoon. Eric Brandt, at the far end of the German side, allowed the smallest, quietest smile. Victoria Hale pressed one palm flat against the doorframe and held it there. In the corridor behind her, Frank Dobbins, who had not gone back downstairs because 26 years would not let him, covered his mouth with both hands and did not move. For the next 52 minutes, Naomi was the bridge. When Meridian's legal team used an American contractual phrase that carried adversarial weight in German business culture, she adjusted it, kept the point, removed the edge. When Richter quoted a German industry proverb, she found its English equivalent, so both sides felt the meaning, and not just the words. At the end, Richter raised one hand. Private meeting, 3 people only. His condition stated once, and not repeated. Sie bleibt als Verbindungsperson für die gesamte Umsetzungsphase. She remains as liaison through the entire implementation phase, no exceptions. Daniel agreed. Richter quieter now. I have negotiated in 23 countries. I have never walked into a room where the most qualified person was the one nobody thought to ask. I will not let that stand. He extended his hand to Naomi. Not charity, not surprise. The clean, direct recognition of one professional to another. She took it. Steady. Her father's dog tag rested cool against her collarbone. Daniel pushed the boardroom doors open. The hallway outside was packed. Every person who had drifted toward the boardroom during the previous hour was still there. The full Richter delegation. Meridian's board members and senior staff. Employees from 3 different floors who had heard whispers and had not gone back to their desks. Engineers, assistants. 2 members of the catering team who had been setting up the post-signing reception and simply never left. They filled the corridor, and they waited. The way people wait when they understand something significant has just happened, and they want to be present for whatever comes out of those doors next. Daniel Prescott stepped out first. He stood in front of all of them. Suits and lanyards and facilities, badges and German tailoring, all occupying the same hallway, and spoke clearly. Let the record show today's deal was saved by Naomi Carter, a member of our facilities team. The fact that this company did not know what she was capable of is a failure of our systems and our assumptions. That failure belongs to us, not to her. The hallway was quiet for a moment. Then Klaus Richter stepped out behind Daniel and stopped directly in front of Naomi. He extended his hand a second time in full view of every person in that corridor. Beside him, his lead German engineer, a man who had spent 44 years in aerospace manufacturing and had worked with ministers and industry leaders on 4 continents, gave Naomi a single deliberate nod. The kind of nod that moves between professionals when the work has been done correctly and nothing more needs to be said about it. Howard Vance stepped forward without ceremony and placed his business card directly in Naomi's hand. 3 words. Call me Monday. Then he stepped back. Eric Brandt moved through the crowd, reached Naomi, and shook her hand. He held it a beat longer than necessary. I knew it, he said quietly. The second you answered me in the atrium, I knew exactly what you were. At the back of the crowd, Frank Dobbins stood with his hands at his sides. He did not step forward. He did not speak. He had been in this building for 26 years and had never needed to place himself at the center of anything. He just stood there. And if you looked closely at his face, you would find something that had not been there this morning, something that looked like a long-held debt being quietly and finally settled. 3 weeks later, Victoria Hale was gone. No dramatic scene, no public confrontation. On a Thursday afternoon, 2 members of the HR department visited her office. The conversation lasted 14 minutes. The official record read, "Conduct materially inconsistent with company values and obstruction of core business operations." By Friday, her name had been removed from the company directory. No farewell email, no goodbye gathering, no announcement. She carried a small box to her car alone, and within a week the people who had worked closest to her had moved on to other conversations, and within a month her name came up less and less, and then not at all. Naomi's new office was on the 12th floor East Corridor, 30 feet from the elevator bank, directly on the route between the executive suite and the parking garage. A brass nameplate was mounted on the door at eye level. Naomi Carter, Director of International Liaison and Translation Services. Victoria walked past it every day during her final 3 weeks. There was no other route to her car. On Victoria's last day, the corridor was empty. No audience, no witnesses. Naomi was coming from the opposite direction with a folder under her arm when they met face to face in the middle of the hall. 3 feet between them. 3 seconds of silence. Naomi spoke first. Her voice was calm and without edges. "I hope things go well for you, Ms. Hale." Victoria shifted the box in her arms, said nothing, turned and walked away. Her heels struck the marble fast at first, then faster, then the sound began to fade softer and softer until it disappeared entirely around the corner at the end of the hall. They never saw each other again. That evening, Naomi sat alone in her new office. She opened her notebook to page 22 and unfolded the rejection letter for the last time. This role requires formal qualifications and demonstrated professional communication credentials. She placed it in a simple frame and hung it on the wall beside her nameplate. Beside it, she taped the page with the 4 crossed-out words. "She's probably right, anyway." The strike threw still clearly visible the ink pressed hard into the paper from the hand that had drawn the line. 3 things on one wall. The rejection. The doubt she almost believed. The nameplate that outlasted both. 6 months after the boardroom, Richter Luftfahrt flew Naomi to Hamburg for the partnership implementation launch. It was the first time she had been to Germany since she was 14 years old. She stood on the tarmac at Hamburg Airport in the gray morning light, watching a commercial aircraft climb slowly into the low clouds, and she thought of her father, of a 7-year-old girl at Ramstein learning to say Guten Morgen in a schoolyard with no idea what it would cost her to hold on to it and what it would eventually be worth. She launched Carter Global 6 months after that cross-cultural business liaison, specializing in aviation and advanced manufacturing. Named for her father. The logo a pair of dog tags on a thin silver chain. Frank Dobbins was promoted to Director of Facilities Operations. At the announcement, he said one sentence, "I didn't do anything except not look away when it mattered." That shouldn't be an achievement, but today I'll take it. Naomi funded a German language program at a public high school in South Dallas, 3 miles from where she grew up, for students who would never be stationed at Ramstein Air Base, but deserved the language anyway. She named it the James Carter Program. Here is a number worth sitting with. 67 million American adults speak a language other than English. 67 million. Fewer than 12% work in roles that use that ability. The average financial cost of a single failed international deal due to communication breakdown, $18.7 million. The cost of asking the right person the right question, 0. Tomorrow you will walk past someone invisible. You will see the badge, the cart, the uniform. You will see what they do for a living, and nothing beyond that. You will not see the language they built in the silence. The knowledge assembled in break rooms and library chairs and cars in parking lots long after everyone else went home. Unless you stop, unless you ask. That is the whole thing. That is all it ever was. The room doesn't give you power. It reveals whether you had the courage to build it when no one was watching. Stop waiting for the right title, the right invitation, the right moment. Build the thing anyway, in the silence, in the margins, in the years nobody notices. And stop walking past people without asking who they actually are. The most expensive assumption in the world is believing that a uniform tells you the whole story. If this hit you, drop a comment. Tell me the skill you built when no one was watching. Tell me the language, the knowledge, the talent that nobody in your workplace has ever bothered to ask about. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you're not subscribed yet, you know what to do. The next story is already waiting.